Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of which seems to be gaining currency, possibly before the US election, but this idea that the West, the white West, the rich white West, only became rich because of slavery, off the backs of the slaves, those hardworking, industrious, triple PhD slaves, only got rich off the slaves, or it stole all the money and all the resources and all the wealth of the black and brown countries, and that's the only reason the West is rich, and there is no other reason. The idea that the West was invented all the modern stuff that we see around us today, irrelevant, absolutely irrelevant, utterly irrelevant. It's just that what they stole off the brown people and the black people and the slave, that was the only thing that made the West rich. Nothing else. So let's just have a look at that, because this is now appearing in many Western textbooks, school textbooks I'm talking about, and history books. This is being taught now to children at schools in the West, that hey, we're only rich because of evil Whitey stole everything or turned the black people into slaves. And now, as with any ideological position, the amount of lies and untruths, and quite grotesque untruths, by the way, are needed to sort of push that agenda. And there's no shortage of lies. For example, the lies that white people rampage the length and breadth of Africa, Central Africa, just rando grabbing black people and taking them to the Americas and the Caribbean and so on. That's of course a complete lie. The only way slaves could be acquired was through buying from black slavers or Arab slavers. There was no other way. The white people didn't have the resources or the capacity to go walking around Africa just rando grabbing black people. And if they had, it wouldn't have worked out so well. The black chieftains and tribal chieftains and so on were not only was slavery absolutely commonplace in Africa, had been for thousands of years, but they were happy, more than happy, beyond happy to sell their fellow countrymen and citizens and even tribal members, even relatives, for goodness sake, sell them into slavery, and they did that. Now, it's certainly in the textbooks that I've seen, the depiction of slavery as it was only ever done by white people. No other race ever did it, ever throughout history. It was only white people, and it was only black people who were enslaved by these evil white people. I mean, that is utterly grotesque untruth, beyond grotesque. But yet it's what's put in, again, it's in school textbooks and history books. It's certainly something that's taught in India, for example. The Indian activists say that India was this incredibly rich country, and that the evil whitey came along and stole it all. That's why that's the only reason India is poor today, because evil whitey took it all. And this is something that a lot of Indians believe. It's now on top of that, you've got this vast NGO network of activists that go around the refugee camps all over the world, whether it's been Africa or Afghanistan or anywhere, and these agitators, professional agitators, again all globalist funded and controlled, they say, well, you've got a right to go to these rich white Western countries. Because you know why they're rich? Because they stole everything from you. They stole it from you. So you have every right to go there and just walk in the front door and demand free housing, free this, free that, because the only reason they've got all that stuff is because they stole it from you. So you have every right to go there. So this has now become a de facto accepted sort of reality. No one's looking at the facts or the history any longer. That's what they're running with, the ideological view that the only reason white countries are rich. And even in middle sort of level countries, say Malaysia. I was talking to a Chinese Malaysian a while ago, and his view, he was a little bit circumspect at first, but the sort of the friendlier we got, he was temporarily a work colleague a while ago, and he or was associated with a project that we were part of, but he started talking about the only reason America's rich is because they took everyone else's wealth. And he really had this view, and the only reason England was rich or Britain was rich, and and that's in a middle economy. Now Malaysia was once a British colony, which is why people there speak English. But his view was, or so he claimed, was that the only reason that the West is rich is because they stole everything from everyone else. And he's quite convinced in that view. He can't be shaken from it, And as I tried to mention, all the inventions, technical inventions, and labour-saving inventions, and wealth-creating inventions, that the mercantile age, and I tried to sort of explain this. No, not having any of it. You white folks are only rich because you stole everything. So then we came to the issue of mass migration. He thinks that any other non-white person from anywhere in the world should have the right, should be entitled to go and, if not emigrate to certainly work in the West, whenever they want to. And well, why? Okay, because the West stole all the money. We have a right to go there and get some of that back. Or the only reason my country's poor and I don't have the same jobs prospects in my country is because you white folks stole everything. That's why. Okay, all right. Well, let's move on from that. So mass migration to the West is okay. Yep. What about mass migration into your country? Well, is that it? Oh no. Well, it can't. Not in our country. We want to retain our culture and our identity, and we want this and we want that. And no, it can only be one way. And the guy just doesn't see any issue with this at all. He's quite convinced that that's an absolutely acceptable point of view to take. The idea there could be any other point of view is what's crazy in his perception. So came back to the slavery thing now. Now with the slavery, of course, slavery's been around for thousands of years, and what people fail, I think, purposefully and willfully fail to accept is that the white people didn't capture any slaves. It was the other black people sold the slaves to them, or bartered. It was often bartered, not necessarily exchange of money. The white folks didn't pull out their wallet and peel off a few nuts or something. It was mostly barter. But nonetheless, the slaves were put on the ships. Now, the depiction of the slaves' condition, that they were packed in like sardines and they all died before they got to the other end, is absurd. How are you going to get slaves from one spot to another if they all die in transit? That clearly didn't happen. Now, the maximum you could get for this is at the height of the slave thing to the Caribbean, or the maximum you could get for a fit, ready to do heavy work slave was probably around $800, which was, by the way, a lot of money back in the day. So that's more than you would pay for a mass-produced motor vehicle, 150 years later. So to get some perspective on that, so say $800. Now, the person to get $800, you've got to have a fit, ready to work slave. So the slaves, because it's depending on the weather, it's 6 to 10 weeks to make the journey. Then the slave has to be well fed. They have to be exercised. They've got to get plenty of water. They've got to be healthy when they get to the other end. I mean, if they get diseases like, I don't know, dysentery or something like that, or any disease, and it makes them look weak and unfit, then there's no way you're going to get so as many slaves as could be arranged had to be fit, ready to work. And some of the agents that were doing the slave buying, so like in the Americas, they were quite rigorous in what they wanted. The slave had to run and jump and turn cartwheels and somersaults and whatever else to show that they were fit and ready for work. And if they weren't only slaves that were unfit, that where it was going to take a bit of time to get them fit, feed them up and so on. So they had got dysentery. You'd be lucky to get $50 for that. Now the break-even point, in all considered, was somewhere around, $350, somewhere around there. So any slave that you couldn't get $350 for, you were losing money. And these voyages were about making money. So you had to have fit, ready to work slaves, not sick, not in poor condition, fit and ready to work if you were going to make money on the voyage. So again, this idea that they all died and packed in like sardines, it's absolute crap, absolute bullshit. So the slaves weren't taken by white people; they were sold by black Africans, enslaving each other, and they had to be in tip-top condition at the other end when they arrived. This is in the Americas or the Caribbean, or even South America. So what were the slaves? Were they? Today we see it as people owning other people, and that's morally reprehensible, which it is, by the way. But back in the day, it was seen as an expedient to acquire a labour force, workers. It was only seen in that light. It wasn't seen as one owns another. And by the way, whites enslaved each other. Irish enslaved English, Scottish enslaved English, English enslaved Irish. And slavery was how it worked. The population distribution, how sparse it was meant that if you had any work of any substance to be undertaken, you had to somehow find labour from somewhere else, particularly given mortality rates at birth and all sorts of things at the time. So you had to find a labour. And that just so happened that black people were resistant to white man's diseases, the smallpox, diphtheria, cholera. Not that they didn't get it, but they were much more resistant than any other race of people. So they were resistant to these diseases, and they were capable of heavy work. And this was important. And it's only because of those reasons that there were a huge surplus of black population, and they were easily accessible, given that their own people would sell them without a second's thought. You didn't get that with other races. Only black chieftains would sell their own people into slavery, because slavery was so common in Africa and had been for thousands of years. So the idea of commercial profit is sort of the next area of activism. So the blacks were the only available labour force for these plantations, and in the United States, and we're talking plantations, not only agriculture, but areas such as cotton and tobacco and coffee and goodness knows what else. But in broad acre, if you like, farming, you needed a large workforce, and it was a labouring force, not value add sort of people that could operate complex machinery or something like that. You needed just a straight out labour force, do that, and they were simple tasks. And again, some of the heavy work involved, and the black people were suited. Black workers were suited for that. So was that the basis for wealth? America became rich off the black slave. Well, that's not true. They were labourers. They didn't invent the machinery or invent the methodologies or devise the organisational structures or develop the commercial structures, or it wasn't that straight labouring. And it's a job that anybody could have done. The reason blacks were chosen again is because they were resistant to diseases, and also resistant to the various distempers and so on that would occur in the United States. A lot of white people were dying. I mean, they tried white people first. I mean, it's much more desirable to have people that can speak the language, can give instructions. We have sort of all common values and beliefs and so on. Much more desirable. The white people were dying at a fantastic rate there. So the only available workforce that were resistant to disease and could do the work were the black people. They would have used another one. It would have been much easier to use the local Indians, for example, but that didn't work out. So it was a kind of the only workforce available was the black people, not the desired workforce, and that needs to be understood. So was the wealth the result of black? Well, the wealth was a result of the price of the commodities at the time, the international mercantile trading networks, which had nothing to do with the black people, the capacity for ships to carry the produce around the place, the long ocean going vessels and the designs, the navigation, or the whole range of things went into the level of profit that was available. Now, if we look at, say, American, or even before the the American Revolution, if we look at the proportion of commerce that was related to primarily, not exclusively, primarily the southern states, where broadacre agricultural crops were the issue, such as cotton and tobacco and so on, and where there were substantial black labouring forces there, worker labourers, then that was never more than about 10%. I mean, at a stretch in some years when the prices were unusually high, about 15% of the total wealth of the colony. So, and then later the United States. Now, as the United States began to, especially in the late 1700s, early 1800s, were using a lot of British industrial methods. Again, the early days of the Industrial Revolution. Then the proportion of the total wealth of the nation, in total GDP terms, the proportion of national wealth derived from these farms or plantations and so on, again, whether these black labourers were, declined, I mean, to probably 10%, maybe a little bit less than 10%. Not that it wasn't a proportion, but did it make America rich? Absolutely not. Not when you've got that proportion of it. Now looking at dividing the cost of maintaining the slaves, as in providing housing, providing food, providing clothing, providing medical care, and so on. Because it was in the slave's interest to procreate, the plantation owner's interest. It was in their interest to procreate their own slaves. So for now to do this, quite a bit of time and money and effort was put into making sure that the mortality rate was low amongst the slaves. So the slaves were given quite a lot of medical care, particularly sort of the midwifery end of things, to make sure that there was a high survival rate. So this is something that's overlooked, that the high survival rate of slaves meant that there was a much higher proportion of homegrown slaves, that is, people born on these plantations, than there were in anywhere else in the world. The reason being, or other than the Caribbean, but the reason being was that in the slaves that the Arabs would take, they would often castrate them, or would not permit procreation, or they would engage in large scale infanticide, so that there would never be a black population. And so you see hardly any black people in these places because of that castration, infanticide, even though they took vastly more slaves than the white people did to the Americas. So coming back to this, so we look at the cost of maintaining a slave, as in accommodation and food and so on. We look at the cost of that, and then look at the cost of hiring a white labourer, and then you look at the difference between that. So if you hire a white labourer, that's viewed as being you didn't get rich off the back of slaves. Whereas if the slave does the work, it somehow made the white people rich. And then you look at the difference. The difference is actually quite small. And with the slave, you have to keep them and keep them through the seasons where there's nothing for them to do. Whereas with the white labourer, you can lay them off. So if you look at the seasons, the work where there was no planting and where there was no harvesting or maintenance, like mending the fences and digging the irrigation ditches or something like that. If you took it and then look at the amount of time where the white labourers got laid off, it was actually slightly more expensive to keep slaves because you couldn't lay them off. So nor was there any point in selling them to, say, another plantation because you're all in the same position. When the off season came along, then it was the same for everybody who had a plantation in the South. So this was the thing. Now, in terms of blacks being exploited, I I don't agree. Firstly, the amount of profits that were made out of these plantations were because of white technology, white infrastructure, white commercial structures, white commerce, white everything. So just having a labourer, you say somebody today that digs a hole in the road, for example, a labourer, that therefore they're entitled to all the profits of the engineering company, or it means the engineering company got rich off them. So no, they didn't. That's an absurd proposition, and so is this black claim that slavery made people rich, and therefore there's reparations. So having a look on a prima facie basis, I can see no case, no case at all to claim that the West got rich over taking over slavery. Coming out of the issue of natural resources, now the view that the Western people had was whoever can make best use of the resources. The resources could be iron ore, or it could be farming land, it could be anything. The people that can make best use of the resources will contribute the most to the common good. That is, it will benefit other people. To leave farmland with no crops on it is almost sinful, because if you can grow those crops, then you can feed people, and feeding people is a good thing. Or if iron ore is coal or whatever is available, then it's almost sinful not to use it, because that iron ore can make tools that will build more tables and chairs, or will contribute to the common good of society. And it's quite a reasonable proposition, by the way. So when the white people, with their higher technology and their technical knowledge and so on, came to, for example, Africa, and they saw millions of acres of prime farmland that had no crops on it, where the natives weren't doing anything with it at all. They were hunter-gatherer tribes, that sort of thing. So they had nothing on it at all. They would say, well, why don't we plant crops on this farmland? And it could be, and given that the areas are so vast, they were broad acre crops rather than sort of smaller niche crops like growing a field of turnips or something. So they would have these broad acre crops, which contributed to the world economy, contributed to the local economy. It fed a lot of people. Sure, did the people that spent all the money building the farm make some money? Well, of course they did. That's hardly a bad thing. But did it contribute to the betterment of society? Well, or people generally? Well, it did. It produced more food, and more people were fed. That's not a bad thing, is it? So this idea of using unused resources was what the white Western people did when they came to these places. Now, remember, the places they were coming to, such as Australia, were hunter-gatherer societies. You say the Maoris in New Zealand were a bit more developed, but not much more. But they were more developed than just straight out hunter-gatherers. They were growing crops and things like that. So, but the idea of farming animals, particularly on the scale, the Maasai, for example, had their small herds, but on the scale of farming and animal husbandry and use of raw materials and those sort of resources, the white people were the only people in the world who were using it. And the hunter-gatherer peoples didn't even have the capacity to comprehend how to turn those rocks into iron ore, which would in turn make axes or spades and shovels and these sorts of things. And the roads needed to get it, the ports needed to move it, the mining equipment needed to extract it. That was a level of technology that these hunter-gatherer Stone Age people couldn't even comprehend in a million years. So the argument that's put forward by the race hustlers or the anti-white people today, again, it's a movement that's completely globalist funded. The idea that these hunter-gatherer people knew exactly what the value it was, but evil Whitey just stole it out of their hands. That's bullshit, complete bullshit. These people had not even the remotest comprehension, nor did they have the discipline and the organisational or social structures to turn millions of acres of prime land into farmland, or to do the mining and the extraction and the road building and all. Otherwise, they would have done it. And so white people were coming along and dealing with societies that were, in developmental terms, thousands of years behind, and so they were making use of resources these people didn't understand and couldn't possibly make use of. So the idea that whites stole it is simply not true, and nor is it ever true. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.